The most reliable way to spot a millionaire in America? Look for the person you almost didn't notice. Picture this. You are at a neighborhood cookout last weekend. Typical scene. Someone is grilling burgers, kids are running around, and your neighbor, the one who always wears the same worn-out polo shirt and drives a 12-year-old Corolla, casually drops into conversation that he just wrote a check for his kid's entire first year of college tuition. No student loans, no financing plan, just a check. You nod politely, grab another drink, and move on. But on your drive home, something starts nagging at you. Because 3 houses down, there is a guy with a brand new leased SUV, a boat he takes out twice a year, and a kitchen remodel that the whole neighborhood watched unfold on social media for 6 months. And suddenly, you are almost certain that the quiet guy in the polo shirt has more money than the guy with the boat. Way more money. And that realization, that uncomfortable little truth, is exactly what we are going to unpack today. Because in this country, the people who look wealthy are often barely hanging on, and the people who actually have serious money look like they just came from running errands at a hardware store. If you cannot tell the difference between those two groups, you are going to spend the next decade of your life modeling yourself after the wrong people, copying the wrong behaviors, and wondering why you never seem to get ahead. Today, I am going to walk you through 10 signs that someone around you might be quietly, secretly wealthy. And then we are going to talk about why looking poor, or at least looking unremarkable, is one of the most important financial strategies that almost nobody teaches you. If you get value from this, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we go deep on topics like this every single week. All right, let us get into it. Sign number 1, their vehicle is spectacularly unremarkable. This is the one that short-circuits people's assumptions faster than anything else. When most people imagine a millionaire, they picture a German sports car or a luxury SUV. But the data tells a completely different story. Large-scale studies of American millionaire households consistently find that the most popular vehicle brands among people with 7-figure net worths are not the ones you would expect. We are talking about brands like Toyota, Honda, and Ford topping the list. Practical, reliable, unglamorous vehicles. Subaru, Lexus, and Acura show up. Eventually, somewhere further down the rankings, the prestige European brands make an appearance, but they are far from dominant. And here is the stat that really puts it in perspective. Research by Thomas Stanley, who spent 4 decades studying wealthy Americans, found that roughly 86% of people driving premium luxury cars in this country are not millionaires. Let that land for a second. The vast majority of people behind the wheel of flashy, expensive vehicles do not actually have the wealth you are assuming they have. So the next time you are sitting at a stoplight and some gleaming new luxury SUV pulls up beside you, the most rational emotional response is not jealousy. It is mild concern for the person making those payments. Now think about the person in your own life who has been driving the same sensible sedan for the last 8 or 9 years. They paid for it outright. They have no car payment, and every time someone suggests they should trade up, they just shrug. That shrug is not indifference. That shrug is wealth. They figured out a long time ago that spending $700 or $800 a month to impress strangers in traffic is one of the worst financial trades you can make. Sign number 2. They live in a house that surprises you with how ordinary it is. Housing is the single largest financial commitment most people will ever make, and this is where the gap between the secretly wealthy and the visibly affluent becomes enormous. Research consistently shows that genuinely wealthy individuals tend to purchase homes valued at somewhere between 1.5 to 3 times their annual income. Compare that to the average American household, which is stretching to buy a home worth 6 or even 7 times their yearly earnings. The wealthy understand something fundamental that most people miss. Your house is not just a place to live. It is the control center for your entire financial existence. Your mortgage payment sets the floor of your monthly obligations. The neighborhood you choose sets the level of social pressure you experience. The size of the home determines your property taxes, your insurance premiums, and even how much you feel compelled to spend on furniture and decor just to fill the rooms. Every extra dollar committed to housing is a dollar that cannot be invested, saved, or used to create freedom later. Warren Buffett is probably the most famous example of this principle. The man has accumulated a fortune north of $100 billion, and he still lives in the same house in Omaha that he purchased back in the late 1950s for roughly $31,000. He has called it one of the best investments he ever made. When one of the richest people on the planet sees no reason to upgrade his living situation, that should tell you something about where real wealth comes from. So if you know someone who lives in a perfectly decent house in a perfectly average neighborhood and has absolutely zero interest in moving to a fancier zip code, do not mistake that for a lack of ambition. That is the ambition. They recognized that the big house in the expensive neighborhood was the trap, and they chose to walk right around it. Sign number 3. You would never recognize a single brand they are wearing. Clothing is one of the fastest ways to tell the difference between someone performing wealth and someone actually possessing it. Studies of verified millionaires have found that half of them have never spent more than a few $100s on a suit in their entire lives. Half have never paid more than a couple hundred for a watch. Half have never spent more than about $150 on a pair of shoes. The typical haircut, tip included, costs them around $15 or $16 at a standard barbershop. That means somewhere in your city right now, there is a person with a net worth in the millions wearing a department store blazer, an inexpensive digital watch, and shoes they bought on sale 3 years ago. And they are silently observing someone else's designer outfit without saying a word. What you will almost never see on a genuinely wealthy person is visible branding. The oversized logos, the monogram patterns, the look-at-me designer accessories. That entire aesthetic of loud branded luxury is almost exclusively the domain of people who are climbing toward wealth or, more often, pretending they have already arrived. There is a reason the concept of quiet luxury resonated so strongly in pop culture recently. Unbranded cashmere, simple baseball caps with no logos, sweaters that cost a fortune but look like they came from a warehouse store. Actual generational wealth does not need to announce itself. The whole point is that you would never know unless someone told you, and nobody is telling you. Sign number 4. They are completely calm when money comes up in conversation. This one is subtle, but once you notice it, you will see it everywhere. Pay attention to what happens in a group setting when the conversation turns to money. Salaries, the cost of something, how much rent is, whether a restaurant was overpriced, most people immediately shift. There is a defensiveness that creeps in, a need to compare, a sudden desire to change the subject. Money makes people uncomfortable because for most people, money represents stress or insecurity. But the secretly wealthy? They talk about money the way they talk about the weather. It is just information to them. There is no tension, no bragging, no deflecting. They can hear a number and simply absorb it without an emotional reaction. That calmness is not a personality trait. It is a position. When you are secure financially, money stops being a loaded topic. It becomes practical, neutral, just a tool. And that emotional neutrality actually serves them in powerful ways. It means they negotiate better because they are not anxious. They invest more rationally because they are not driven by fear or greed. They plan long-term because they are not in survival mode. If you are in a conversation and someone just calmly acknowledges financial topics without any weird energy, without flexing, without downplaying, you might be sitting across from someone with a lot more in the bank than you realize. Sign number 5. They have a job that would bore you to tears. This one really challenges people because we have been culturally conditioned to associate prestige with wealth. We assume the richest people must be tech founders, hedge fund managers, or celebrity surgeons. But the data demolishes that assumption. Large-scale studies of self-made millionaires consistently find that the most common professions are things like engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, and attorney. Not glamorous, not headline-grabbing, just steady and well-compensated. And when you look at millionaires who built wealth through business ownership, the picture gets even more mundane. 2/3 of them in Stanley's research ran what he described as dull, ordinary businesses. We are talking about welding contractors, pest control services, dry cleaners, regional auctioneers, mobile home park operators. Not the kind of thing that gets featured in a magazine profile, but the kind of thing that throws off consistent cash flow year after year after year. One of the most striking examples I have ever come across is a man named Ronald Red. He worked at a gas station and later as a part-time janitor in a small town in Vermont. He drove a second-hand economy car. He wore a flannel jacket that was literally held together with a safety pin. He chopped his own firewood well into his 90s. When he passed away, his neighbors discovered he had quietly assembled a stock portfolio worth roughly $8 million. He had simply bought shares in solid companies and held on to them for decades. No tricks, no insider knowledge, no fancy strategy, just patience and consistency from a man earning near minimum wage. So that 50-year-old engineer you know who has been working at the same firm for 2 decades and never talks about money? There is a real possibility that person could financially outpace almost everyone on their street. They just have no interest in telling anyone. Now pause for a second here. How many of these signs have you already matched to someone in your life? Think about it. Keep that person in mind as we continue because the next batch of signs is where things get really interesting. Sign number 6. They know their financial numbers cold. Here is something that separates wealthy people from almost everyone else. If you ask them about their finances, they can give you precise answers. They know their net worth. They know their monthly expenses down to a reasonable degree of accuracy. They know their savings rate as a percentage of income. They know how their investments are allocated and approximately what kind of return they are generating. This sounds basic, but the reality is that most people cannot answer any of those questions. Federal Reserve data indicates that only around half of American families even have a retirement account, and among those who do, the median balance is alarmingly low. Studies show that roughly 80% of millionaires consistently contributed to their employer-sponsored retirement plans, yet data from major investment firms reveals that only about 14% of all retirement plan participants actually max out their contributions each year. So when someone casually mentions that they max out their retirement contributions every year and also fund additional investment accounts, they are not just doing okay. They are in a tiny statistical minority of disciplined wealth builders, and they almost certainly have far more money accumulated than anyone around them would guess. The wealthy know their numbers because knowing the numbers is how they got there in the first place. Financial awareness is not a side effect of wealth, it is the foundation of it. Sign number 7. They never talk about what they do. This is almost like a fingerprint for hidden wealth. When you ask a truly wealthy person what they do for a living, the answer is almost always short, vague, and designed to redirect the conversation. Something like, oh, I am in real estate, or I run a small company, or I do some consulting, and then immediately they ask you a question about yourself. The conversation moves on, and you realize 10 minutes later that you learned essentially nothing about them. Now contrast that with someone who looks rich but is not actually wealthy. Ask them what they do, and you get a job title, a company name, their department, the size of their team, a mention of their last project, and probably a name drop or two. By the time they finish, you know their entire professional biography. This pattern is not accidental. There is a well-documented concept in behavioral science called counter-signaling. The idea is that when you genuinely have high status, advertising that status is unnecessary. It is already known to the people who matter, and proving it to strangers offers you nothing in return. It is the people in the middle of the distribution who signal the hardest, because they need outsiders to perceive a level of success they have not fully locked in yet. Think about the social gatherings you have attended recently. Who told you almost nothing about themselves and seemed genuinely curious about you instead? That person is probably worth more than anyone else at the party. Genuine wealth does not introduce itself. It has no need to. Sign number 8. They have money coming in from places you do not know about. This is one of the most overlooked indicators. Wealthy individuals almost always have multiple streams of income running quietly in the background. A rental property that cash flows every month, a dividend portfolio generating passive income, a small side business that their primary employer does not even know about, maybe royalties from something they created years ago. Tax data consistently shows that people in the highest wealth brackets are significantly more likely to have three or more distinct income sources compared to the average household. And the critical word here is quietly. They are not posting about it on social media. They are not selling courses about how to replicate their strategy. They do not have a TikTok about their passive income journey. That investment property they picked up years ago has been generating steady rental income for a decade, and you have absolutely no idea it exists. Think about the person in your life who works a fairly normal job but always seems to have options. They could quit tomorrow, and it would not be a crisis. They could take months off and not panic. That is almost never the result of just a high salary. There is something else going on behind the scenes, and they have zero motivation to tell you what it is. Because the moment they start talking about it, it becomes a conversation topic, and they did not build what they have by talking about money. They built it by quietly putting money to work. Sign number 9. They play defense like their life depends on it. Most people think wealth comes from going on offense, picking the right stock, starting the right business, catching the right trend at the right moment. And yes, those things matter. But here is what separates the people who build wealth from the people who keep it. Building wealth requires risk-taking and ambition. Keeping wealth requires something entirely different. It requires caution, discipline, humility, and a healthy dose of paranoia that everything you have built could disappear. Consider two people from the same era. One was a high-powered executive with an elite education and an 18,000 square foot mansion. Within a few years, the bank foreclosed on his home and he went personally bankrupt. The other was the gas station janitor we talked about earlier, Ronald Read, who died with $8 million in the bank, having never earned more than a modest wage in his entire life. Same decade, same country, completely opposite outcomes. The difference was not intelligence or investment returns, it was defense. Research consistently shows that the average individual investor dramatically underperforms the broader market over extended periods. Not because they lack knowledge, but because of behavior. Panic selling during downturns, chasing whatever performed well last year, trying to time the market. The wealthy person buys a broadly diversified index fund and then does essentially nothing for 30 years. They do not tinker. They do not react to headlines. They do not try to be clever. They just hold. The crowd churns and destroys its own returns. The quietly wealthy hold steady and let compounding do the heavy lifting. As Morgan Housel puts it, getting rich and staying rich are fundamentally different skills that require almost opposite temperaments. The first requires boldness. The second requires restraint. Sign number 10. They are purchasing freedom, not possessions. This is the deepest sign, the one that ties everything together, and the one I want you to remember long after this video ends. The truly wealthy have realized that the entire purpose of money is not to acquire things. It is to buy back your time and expand your freedom. Every financial decision they make passes through a single filter. Does this purchase make me more free, or does it create a new obligation? A leased luxury vehicle locks you into a large monthly payment for years. That is less freedom. A paid-off reliable car frees up that same money to be invested or saved. That is more freedom. An enormous mortgage chains you to a job you might hate just to cover the payments. A modest mortgage, or no mortgage at all, gives you the flexibility to switch careers, take a sabbatical, or retire years earlier than you thought possible. One of the most remarkable examples of this philosophy belonged to Chuck Feeney, who co-founded the duty-free shoppers empire and built a fortune of approximately $8 billion. Over the course of his life, he gave virtually all of it away, intentionally reducing his personal wealth to roughly $2 million by the time he passed. He wore an inexpensive plastic watch his entire life. He flew economy class even on long international flights. When someone asked why he did not wear an expensive watch, he reportedly said something to the effect of, "Why would I? It tells the same time." His stated goal was for the last check he ever wrote to bounce. That is the ultimate expression of understanding what money is actually for. Now here is why all of this matters beyond just spotting wealthy people at dinner parties. The reason looking poor, or more accurately, looking unremarkable, is so strategically important has everything to do with the mechanics of how wealth actually gets destroyed. And I want to spend some real time on this because it might be the most valuable part of this entire conversation. The first reason staying under the radar matters is that it protects you from lifestyle inflation. Lifestyle inflation is what happens when your spending automatically rises to match or exceed every increase in your income. You get a raise and suddenly you feel like you deserve a nicer apartment. You hit a bonus and a new car starts to seem reasonable. Before you know it, you are making significantly more money than you were 5 years ago. But you feel just as financially stressed because your expenses grew right alongside your earnings. This is incredibly common. It is actually how many people with strong incomes end up living paycheck to paycheck. They are earning plenty, but every dollar is spoken for because their lifestyle absorbed it all. And the insidious part is that other people cannot tell. From the outside, it looks like success, the nice apartment, the new car, the frequent vacations. But behind the curtain, there is credit card debt propping up the image and very little actual savings. When you deliberately choose not to look the part, when you keep driving the same car and living in the same place even after your income goes up, you create a gap between what you earn and what you spend. And that gap is literally where wealth accumulates. It is the single most important number in your financial life, more important than your salary, more important than your investment returns. The gap is everything. The second reason staying quiet about your money matters is that it eliminates the pressure to keep upgrading. There is a fascinating psychological phenomenon sometimes called the Diderot effect, named after the French philosopher Denis Diderot. The story goes that Diderot was a man of modest means who came into some money and used it to buy himself one beautiful, luxurious robe. But once he had this gorgeous robe, everything else in his life suddenly looked inadequate by comparison. So he replaced his rug, then his chair, then he bought art, then sculptures. And before long, he had spent himself back into poverty, surrounded by beautiful things, but completely broke. This happens to people all the time and they do not even realize it. You buy one nice thing and suddenly everything around it needs to be upgraded to match. A new dress demands new shoes. New shoes demand a new bag. A kitchen renovation makes the living room look dated. It is an endless cascade of spending, triggered by a single purchase. When you opt out of that game entirely, when you are content with what you already own and resistant to the urge to constantly upgrade, you cut off that chain reaction before it starts. You keep far more money, and you free yourself from a cycle that has no natural endpoint. The third reason looking unremarkable matters is that it keeps your social environment from eating your wealth alive. There is serious academic research on this. Economists have found that living near higher income neighbors directly increases your own spending. The effect is measurable and significant. When everyone around you has nicer things, you unconsciously start spending more to keep pace, even if you can comfortably afford not to. The secretly wealthy understand this intuitively. They choose neighborhoods where they are at the top of the local income distribution rather than the bottom. They become the wealthiest household on a modest block rather than the least wealthy household in an expensive zip code. By doing this, they remove the constant low-grade social pressure that causes most people to overspend. Their kids go to schools where the families are similar. Their neighbors are not creating implicit pressure to renovate, upgrade, or consume. Your zip code is not just an address. It is an influence machine, and the quietly wealthy have figured out how to make that machine work for them instead of against them. The fourth reason is one that gets almost no attention, but it might be the most psychologically important of all. When you stop using money to project an image, you can start using money to buy things that actually make you happy. Research on consumer satisfaction consistently shows that experiences, time-saving services, and stress-reducing purchases correlate far more strongly with lasting life satisfaction than status-driven material goods. The fancy car gives you a spike of pleasure that fades within weeks, but using that same money to hire help that frees up your weekends or to build a financial cushion that lets you sleep soundly, or to take a career risk because you have savings backing you up. Those things produce lasting improvements in quality of life. The hedonic treadmill is real. Our brains adapt to new levels of material comfort very quickly, which means the happiness from a new purchase fades and you need another purchase to get the same feeling. It is a cycle that leads nowhere. The wealthy broke off that treadmill by understanding that the best things money can buy are not things at all. They are time, security, options, and peace of mind. The fifth reason is that money you do not spend on appearances can be redirected into what I like to call a freedom fund. At its core, money provides exactly two things: freedom and flexibility. When you stop hemorrhaging cash on maintaining an image, you can start stockpiling the kind of financial reserves that fundamentally change your life. You can build an emergency fund that means an unexpected expense is a minor inconvenience instead of a crisis. You can accumulate enough savings to leave a toxic job without panicking about next month's rent. You can create enough runway to pursue a passion project, start a business, or go back to school. That freedom fund is the real status symbol. Not the car in your driveway, not the zip code on your mail, not the brand on your clothes. The ability to say no. The ability to walk away, the ability to make decisions based on what you actually want rather than what you are financially trapped into. That is the ultimate luxury, and it is completely invisible to everyone except you. And the sixth and final reason staying under the radar matters is that it lets compounding work uninterrupted. Compounding is the most powerful force in wealth building, but it requires two things that most people are terrible at providing: time and patience. Every dollar you spend to maintain appearances is a dollar that gets removed from the compounding machine. And the earlier it gets removed, the more devastating the impact, because that dollar was going to multiply over decades. Warren Buffett accumulated the vast majority of his wealth after his 60th birthday. Not because his returns suddenly got better, but because he had been investing since he was 10 years old and he never stopped. Decades of uninterrupted compounding is what produced those extraordinary numbers. His edge was not genius stock picking. His edge was time in the market. When you look wealthy on the outside, you are constantly withdrawing money from the compounding engine to fund your image. When you look unremarkable, that money stays invested and continues to grow. Over 10, 20, 30 years, the difference is staggering. Two people with the same income and the same investment knowledge can end up in completely different financial positions based solely on how much they withdrew from the compounding process to fund their lifestyle. So let me bring all of this together. Tomorrow, walk through your own neighborhood and really look at the houses around you. The one with the modest sedan in the driveway, the hedges that could use a trim, the furniture visible through the window that has clearly been there for years. Statistically, that is the household most likely to have serious wealth quietly sitting inside it. The one with the brand new electric vehicle, the perfectly manicured lawn, and the recently finished renovation that everyone saw on social media. That one might be a single missed paycheck away from a very uncomfortable phone call with the bank. That is the reality hiding in plain sight all around us. The whole purpose of being secretly wealthy is the secret part, because the moment you start signaling your wealth, you start spending it. And the moment you start spending money to prove you have it, you start losing it. The people who truly understand money have internalized something most people never will. Wealth is not what you display. Wealth is what you have left over after you refuse to display anything. Now think honestly about your own behavior. Are you playing the status game, trying to one-up the people around you with visible markers of success? Or are you playing the wealth game, quietly building something real behind the scenes while everyone else burns their money trying to look like they already made it? Because here is the truth. Those are two completely different games with completely different outcomes. And most people are playing the wrong one without even realizing it. If this changed how you think about money, even a little bit, hit that subscribe button so I can keep making these. Drop a comment telling me which of these 10 signs resonated with you the most. Or better yet, tell me how many of them match someone you personally know. I read every single comment, and I am always collecting ideas for the next one. I will see you in the next video.